Yeah, tell us about MacroFactor. And you started this nutrition tracking app. We love tracking macros over here. So yeah, tell us about it.
Sure. Yeah. So it is a food logger with coaching functionality built in. So if you have experience using like MyFitnessPal, Lose It, Chronometer, something like that, you're probably familiar with food logging. You log what you eat, pretty straightforward, whatever. But then a challenge that a lot of people have is they then need to kind of like do their own kind of light data analysis to make decisions based on their nutrition and weight info, like relative to the goals they have. So if someone is like trying to lose a pound a week, for example, the process they might use is going online, finding a TDE, total daily energy expenditure calculator, just like plugging in their basic demographic and anthropometric information. And the calculator says like, hey, based on this and your reported activity, we think you're burning like 3,000 calories a day. And then you do some more reading and you find that like, a pound of fat's about 3,500 calories. So if this calculator says I burn 3,000 calories a day, I need to eat about 500 calories a day less than that to lose a pound a week. So like, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. 2,500 calories, let it ride. And then like maybe they try that and it just like doesn't work for them. Either they're not losing weight, or maybe they're losing weight way too fast and they're like very hungry and fatigued all the time. And then the ball's kind of in their court. It's just like, hey, what am I going to do with this information? Like how am I going to change my intake targets to figure out how I can actually like reasonably and accurately pursue my goals and not just go from kind of like binging to crash dieting back and forth over and over again. And like that process of like figuring all of that out for yourself isn't the most complicated thing in the world, but also we tend to be emotional, and like most coaches' worst client is themselves. Like it's a lot easier to like objectively and dispassionately look at someone else's data than your own. Ultimately, at the end of the day, like there are pretty straightforward physiological relationships between like weight, nutrition intake, and energy expenditure. Like the rate at which you're gaining or losing weight kind of independently, even if you don't know what someone's eating, the rate at which their weight is changing gives you a pretty good idea of the size of the deficit or surplus they're in. And then if you also have their nutrition information, you can roughly calculate how much energy they're actually expending. And then that will change over time as your exercise and activity habits change, or just as you gain or lose weight, or you're in a deficit or surplus for a prolonged period of time. Like a phenomenon called metabolic adaptation will kick in. You'll either start burning more calories, start burning fewer calories. If you have a continuous stream of weight and nutrition data, you can track someone's energy expenditure over time pretty well. And then knowing the surplus or deficit implied by a particular rate of weight gain or weight loss, if someone says like, hey, I want to gain or lose weight at this particular rate, and you have that pretty decent estimate of their energy expenditure, you can give them really accurate nutrition recommendations to reach those goals. That's ultimately what MacroFactor does. Like it has a really good food logger that is nice and pleasant to use, but it also allows you to kind of offload a lot of those decisions that you would have to make for yourself for, given what my goals are, what should my nutrition targets be, and how do those need to change over time for me to actually pursue my goal.
Where did a lot of these calculations come from? Or like where are we generating this information of telling people, hey, based on this data you've given us, this is what we think you might need to be eating. And we'll just keep it at maintenance calories because obviously everything else depends. But where did all the information come from? Because it seems like y'all are looking at more than just height, weight, age, and it's like I feel like TDE also looks at body fat percentage maybe. But how did you guys come to those conclusions on guidelines?
There are two elements here. One is how we generate kind of those initial estimates and those initial recommendations, and we don't do anything too crazy for that. I mean that is basically the same as like an online TDE calculator, because we don't already have a historical stream of your weight and nutrition data. So we were intentional about, especially for lifters, like not trying to lowball them. So there are, God, probably 30 or 40 different equations you could use to estimate someone's basal metabolic rate based on stuff like height, weight, sex, age, body composition, whatever. And they all tend to perform like pretty similarly. And the one that we went with was the 1980 version of the Cunningham equation, which the reason we went with that is for the broader population, its performance is, pretty similar to just about any other BMR formula. But a paper by Tinsley and colleagues, I think from 2019 or so, was looking at how a bunch of different equations performed, particularly in a subsample of like pretty highly trained lifters. And the 1980 version of the Cunningham equation, and I believe the Tin-Hoff equation, which I've never seen anyone use. Like it's just kind of like sitting in the literature and rarely gets cited, and I don't see any online calculators using it. But it's pretty similar to the Cunningham equation. Those were the two that performed the best. And one of the reasons for that is the Cunningham equation is one of the few that uses like a direct estimate of lean mass. So most of them don't include like body composition data to estimate BMR. They broadly work on the premise of just feeding a bunch of stuff into it that will correlate with body composition. So if you know height, age, sex, weight, those things should put you kind of in the right general ballpark for how much lean mass someone has. But then if someone is a lifter and has way more lean mass relative to their weight than someone in the general population, one of those equations that doesn't take body comp into account will kind of tacitly assume you have less lean mass than you do, and therefore tacitly assume your BMR is lower than it is. And then if you take a lower number and multiply it by an activity multiplier, like multiply it by anything, you're just like magnifying that error. If you say you're moderately active and that has like a multiplier of 1.5, but your BMR equation underestimated your BMR by 300 calories, then you're propagating that error. You're multiplying everything by 1.5. So that gets you a TDE estimate that's now 450 calories too low. Depending on your perspective, kind of equally good or equally bad for the general population. But the ones that consider body comp directly tend to perform particularly well in people that do have body compositions that differ meaningfully from the general norm for people of their age, sex, and weight. So yeah, that's probably why it generated a better estimate for you, because I assume you're more jacked than the average 115.
Yeah, Lori's jacked, bro.
I think you guys have just done such a good job with the Macro Factor app of helping people more accurately at least get a good, reasonable starting place, because that's what we're always just trying to explain to people, because they'll be like, well, do I use activity level this? Do I use... And it's like, dude, just pick one, because you then have to test it, right? Like regardless of where you start, you have to keep going and you have to test and see what's true for me. And so to just help people, fix that learning curve and just start a little bit closer than maybe they might with other things, I think that is huge.